And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
We live in the greatest country in the world. A country that was created to give every person an equal voice. A country that believed and respected its citizens. But things are much different now. This once great country of ours has lost its way. Controlled only by a few, whose greed is unparalleled. We are quickly becoming a country that consists of the haves and the have-nots. A country where the rights of its citizens are becoming a distant memory. But through all the uncertainty, there is a solution. And this year, 2013, is the year that will change the history of our country forever.
Our national debt is approaching $1 trillion. A few weeks ago, I called such a figure, $1 trillion, incomprehensible. And I've been trying ever since to think of a way to illustrate how big $1 trillion really is. And the best I could come up with is that if you had a stack of $1,000 bills in your hand, only 4 inches high, you'd be a millionaire. $1 trillion would be a stack of $1,000 bills 67 miles high.
A new world order can emerge.
Auto sales are way up. Home sales at a record high. Business investment in equipment is growing at 7 times the rate of the previous 4 years.
Shares opened at $9 and jumped to $97 on its first day of trading.
I saw stocks go up 30 and 40 points a day.
If you don't get on this technology boom, you're going to just be left in the dust. You're going to miss the whole thing.
It means we use the mighty muscle of the federal government in combination with state and local governments to encourage owning your own home.
In this amazing world of instant global communications, the free and efficient movement of capital is helping to create the greatest prosperity in human history.
Real estate could be the key to your future.
Houses are selling like hotcakes.
Yeah, that makes 12 straight months of positive sales.
Houses with no money down. Another house with no money down. 3 cars, 2 motorcycles, a boat, clothes, jewelry, vacations. It all came tumbling down.
This is an extraordinary period for America's economy. Over the past few weeks, many Americans have felt anxiety about their finances and their future. Credit markets have frozen. Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed.
The Dow traders are standing there watching in amazement, and I don't blame them.
It was the worst day on Wall Street.
Can't look at it after you buy it. It's so horrible.
But the stock market is now down 21%.
This market is as volatile as you'll ever see.
I have never live looked at the Dow Jones Industrial Board and seen a 600-point loss. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
This was 1 week, Maria. This market took 5 years to go higher. It's now down 40%.
We haven't seen anything like this probably since the Great Depression, I think it's fair to say.
Life, as most Americans know it, is about to change.
The impact of this recession is real, and it is everywhere.
We're in the last days of this country surviving.
This is not a recovery, it's merely a cover-up.
People are disgusted, people are upset, and yet all the news is sunny.
The economy is not recovering, it's getting sicker.
We are repeating the mistakes of the Great Depression.
We need to bring production back to America. There's not going to be a middle class
in 10 years.
The class division is between the top 1% and everybody else.
CEO pay soars while workers' pay stalls.
Food inflation.
Gas goes up, milk goes up, trains go up. How am I supposed to live?
We're going to have a collapse much worse than 2008, but unfortunately, that's part of the cure. We have serious structural imbalances that need to be corrected.
In response to the nationwide decision by all U.S. banks to increase interest payments on all school loans to over 16%, students gathered today to burn their student loan documents in protest.
The Fed's decision last week to initiate QE6 sent commodity prices soaring, and as a direct result, we're seeing triple-digit inflation numbers in food.
China's largest credit rating agency downgrades U.S. Treasuries to junk status, and Moody's downgrades the U.S. Treasury yet again. On top of that, S&P warns of another downgrade of the U.S. dollar if debt ceiling isn't raised to $25 trillion.
I'll come back and they tell me you fired. And I'll say, what for? I didn't do anything.
Walmart, the largest employer in America, just announced that they will be cutting 23% of their workforce. At the same time, the U.S. government is reporting an unemployment rate of higher than 14.3%, which is a 58% increase from last year's numbers.
For the first time in U.S. history, a Treasury auction fell short of buyers, causing rates to spike over 11% today, its largest increase in over a decade. Panic in the bond markets has ensued.
This morning, the Fed announced QE9 for $1.9 trillion, bringing the total stimulus for 2016 to $3.6 trillion.
They try to claim that the stimulus bill worked, and I just look at all of the polling data, and no one believes it.
It's like a sugar fix, like a sugar high, fueled only by the Fed.
New numbers from the government today showed unemployment rising again.
Our national debt is now approaching $20 trillion, and the Federal Reserve just announced that we are unable to pay the interest on our debt.
Once an unthinkable event has now become a reality, and chaos has now broken out everywhere.
The future of our country doesn't have to look like that. The economic disease that is threatening to destroy our country is something that can no longer be ignored by any of us. Because the problem doesn't just affect a few people anymore. It affects every social class in America. However, there is a solution. But in order for it to work, you need to pay attention. Our economy, a complex creature that seems too sophisticated for many Americans to understand, is exactly how Wall Street and the financial elite want to keep it. The less you know, the more they get away with. And we don't have to look back too far from today to see it firsthand. If you remember the savings and loan scandal of the early 80s, which cost U.S. taxpayers over $124 billion, and at the time was viewed as an unthinkable amount to be used to bail out bankers who preyed upon innocent Americans, well, that figure pales in comparison to the financial crisis we just experienced. The economic collapse of 2008 was the worst since the Great Depression, and according to a new report from Better Markets, a pro-financial reform organization, the crisis cost Americans over $12.8 trillion. Tens of millions of Americans also lost their savings, their jobs, and their homes. The savings and loan crisis, which was infinitely smaller, resulted in thousands of executives going to jail for committing fraud against the American public. When trillions of dollars were lost as a direct result of the 2008 crisis, not one executive was sent to jail, and not one has been held accountable. The corruption in Washington has reached epic levels thanks to the financial sector's employment of over 3,000 lobbyists, more than 5 for each member of Congress. Even when taxpayer money was used to bail out these institutions who caused irreparable damage to our country, they refused to give us full transparency on who is receiving our hard-earned dollars.
So my question to you is, will you tell the American people to whom you lent $2.2 trillion
of their dollars. Will you tell us who got that money and what the terms are of those agreements?
Hundreds and hundreds of banks, any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Will you tell us who they are?
No.
Recently, Frontline produced a must-see documentary called The Untouchables, which investigated why Wall Street's leaders have escaped prosecution from any fraud related to the sale of bad mortgages.
I was really upset about what went on Wall Street that brought about the financial crisis. Not only almost destroyed the financial system of the United States, almost destroyed the financial system of the world. That doesn't happen if there isn't something bad going on.
But today, more than 4 years since the financial crisis of 2008, there have been no arrests of any senior Wall Street executives.
The Justice Department has indicted something like 2,000 to 3,000 people that were making the loans, the loan originators.
Right. Shooting fish in a barrel. That's what that is.
No bankers have gone to jail. Yeah. Does that surprise you?
No. It doesn't surprise me.
In order to begin to understand how this could happen in one of the greatest countries in the world, we need to go back to the 1970s. During this time is when we begin to see an extraordinary expansion of wealth to the top 1% and a major inequality gap develop. Currently, the wealth disparity in America is worse than it has ever been and is now higher than any developed country. For the first time in history, average Americans have less education and are less prosperous than their parents. Now, the top 1% of Americans control over 40% of all the wealth in the U.S., and they control an aggregate net worth that is greater than the bottom 90% of individuals combined. To fully understand this historic wealth transfer, it's important to look at a chart of the money supply in America during this time. What this chart represents is how many U.S. dollars there are in existence. As you can see, in the 1970s, we see an enormous increase in U.S. paper dollars that exist. As we get closer to present day, we begin to see the explosion in currency creation due to the recent bailouts of the financial sector. The expansion of dollars in circulation may sound like a good thing to you, but it's not. It's simply a supply and demand equation, so don't let this confuse you, and don't be intimidated by it. If there's too much of something, its value becomes less. The more money that is being printed, the less your money is worth. The less your money is worth, the more expensive things are around you. This is called inflation. And as a result, things like food, gas, clothes, and healthcare become a larger and larger portion of your monthly expenses. This is why the poor and middle class are affected the most by inflation. If the dollar's value is destroyed when more money is printed, then who wins when this happens? In a financial system that is engineered to make the rich even richer and the average stay the same, the only people who can benefit in a country that is destroying its own currency are the financial elite of the country. The Washington Post found the following. Since the 1970s, the median pay for executives at the nation's largest companies has more than quadrupled, even after adjusted for inflation. Over the same period, pay for a typical non-supervisory worker has dropped more than 10%. The abuse of our financial system has been ongoing for decades, but it has never been as blatant as it was during the 2008 collapse. As the currency supply reached extreme levels, money was flowing around the financial system like water. The elite banking institutions took full advantage of this opportunity and created enormous amounts of wealth for themselves and their companies. And in the end, when the music stopped, the taxpayer was left holding the bag, and they walked away with trillions in bonuses and pay packages. Stan O'Neill, for example, the CEO of Merrill Lynch, which was on the brink of failure before it was acquired by Bank of America, received $90 million. After driving his firm into the ground, Merrill Lynch's board of directors allowed him to resign, and he collected $151 million in severance. O'Neill's successor, John Thain, was paid $87 million in 2007, and in December of 2008, 2 months after Merrill was bailed out by U.S. taxpayers, Thain and Merrill's board handed out billions in bonuses. In 2009, as unemployment hit its highest level in more than 17 years, Morgan Stanley paid its employees over $14 billion, and Goldman Sachs paid out over $16 billion. This gross display of greed, during a time when our country was experiencing the worst financial collapse since the Great Depression, goes to show you the arrogance these institutions maintain. They control our money supply, and now they control much of our government as the divide between Wall Street and Washington has all but gone away. It's a Wall Street government controlled by the biggest banking institutions in the world, and now, more than ever, they are making their own rules. A familiar face you may remember is a man named Henry Paulson, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, the biggest investment banking firm in the United States and one of the biggest contributors to the financial collapse. Mr. Paulson served as Goldman's CEO from 1999 to 2006 and was the highest paid on Wall Street. According to Forbes, his net worth has been estimated at over $700 million. On May 30th, 2006, Mr. Paulson became Treasury Secretary of the United States. By doing so, Paulson was forced to sell his $485 million of Goldman stock, but because of a law passed by the first President Bush, he didn't have to pay taxes on it, and it saved him over $50 million. This is just another example of how the divide between Wall Street and Washington has become non-existent, and as a result, some of the same banking institutions that created the 2008 collapse are now even bigger than they were before the crisis. So, what was it about the early 1970s that set us off on this perilous journey that is destroying everything our forefathers set out to create? For decades, our country's monetary system was based on what is called the gold standard. This helped our nation thrive during the Industrial Revolution and made us the center of economic power that we are today, even making the dollar the world's reserve currency. What a gold standard represented was that our money meant something. It wasn't just a piece of paper with some ink printed on it. Prior to 1971, the dollar was on the gold standard, which simply meant that every single dollar had a portion of gold stored at the U.S. Treasury. A dollar was essentially a gold certificate, or a claim on gold. Only a certain amount of money could be printed according to how much gold we had in reserves at the U.S. Treasury. What the gold standard accomplished was that it handcuffed politicians and bankers from printing as much money as they wanted. They actually needed to be disciplined in spending and borrowing, and the government couldn't run secret bailouts worth trillions of dollars. Because of this, the financial elite from around the world despised having the gold standard constrict their abilities to print as much money as they wanted. Gold was a fixed money supply, expanding with the economy at a very stable rate, but the bankers wanted a money supply that they controlled in order to increase their profits, loans payable to them, and debt that they could create out of thin air. By having the gold standard in place, it would be impossible for the people at the top to commit the type of fraud they have over the last 4 decades. If politicians wanted to spend too much money or go to war with money they didn't have, they couldn't. The gold standard gave us an honest money supply and a more disciplined government and banking sector. However, on August 15, 1971, due to pressures from the central banks and an expansion in government, President Nixon claimed he was going to temporarily suspend the U.S. gold standard.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
They led the American people to believe that the suspension of the gold standard was a temporary measure that Washington had to take, while fully understanding that this abolishment would be permanent and would change the future of America forever, for the benefit of only a few. From this point on, the dollar wasn't tied to gold anymore, and it became what is referred to as a floating currency or a fiat currency. Now, with nothing constraining its creation, our money supply exploded and all bets were off. Our currency was now prisoner to a few elite banking institutions that could create money as they deemed necessary. Abolishing the gold standard was the last hurdle for the financial elite to overcome. From here on out, the money poured in for the top 1% of our country and changed the course of America forever. This destroyed the value of our currency for the majority of us, while a small percentage made fortunes. This was the beginning of the extreme divide between the rich and the poor in our country. This historic increase in our money supply created the perception of a boom, but the living standards for the majority of Americans have collapsed, while those at the top have flourished. The destruction of our dollar is why it now takes 2 incomes just to support a family. As the government continues to expand the money supply, this scenario will only get worse for the majority of Americans if we don't begin to create change now. We need to restore the gold standard and put the handcuffs back on the politicians and elite bankers so this can never happen again. If we don't act now, the end result will be the collapse of the entire middle class and complete civil chaos. If you don't believe this is an issue that affects you, think again. No matter what your occupation is, you get paid in dollars, you save in dollars, and you value your assets in dollars. This affects you whether you like it or not, and the financial elite of our country control your future. Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled, one way or another, by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate. President Garfield was assassinated just weeks after making this statement. Without a return to the gold standard, you and your family will continue to be robbed by the financial elite of this country. We must demand a gold standard immediately and take back control of this once great nation. And here is how we're going to do it. On September 4th, 2013, we are going to deliver to the steps of Congress the biggest petition this country has ever seen that demands the return to the gold standard. This petition will be located at goldstandard2013.org and will be signed by millions of Americans just like yourself. We are targeting some of the most influential celebrities in America to use their voices to expose the gold standard and the impact it will have for generations to come. They have the ability to spread this message to millions of Americans with a single click, and we need their help in taking this message nationwide. Then, we're going after the individuals that can help make change, the policymakers. No matter what side you're on, this is something we can all agree on.
When inequality becomes so apparent in this country that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people demanding a solution, like restoring the gold standard, the United States government has no choice but to address the issue.
We've identified the policymakers that can help make the gold standard become a reality, so we are focusing on them. On our website, we've made it easy to call them, write them directly, meet with them to get their attention. And that's what we intend to do. With your help, we will stop this from happening, and we will do it this year, 2013. We the people will post this video on every social website, blog, media outlet, message board, chat room that we can find. We will share it with everyone we know until we have blanketed the internet with this important message that exposes these criminals for what they are. Then, on September 4th, 2013, we will march to the steps of Congress and deliver to the Obama administration and to Congress one of the largest petitions this country has ever seen. This is the day we will make history. This is the day we will take back control of our country. For decades, the American financial system was stable and safe. But then something changed. Washington and the financial industry turned its back on society, corrupted our political system, and plunged the world economy into crisis, destroying many lives without remorse. It's always been that the decisions made by the people with the money and the power dictated the priorities of their government and economy. They create the future as they see it, for only the benefit of a select few. Without the gold standard constraining the mass creation of our currency, we will always be prisoners to the financial elite of this country, and that's unacceptable. We have reached a crucial time in our country's history where what we do or don't do right now will affect every generation to come. The financial system that is designed to benefit only a select few is at the root of our crisis, and that needs to change. They will tell us that reinstating the gold standard will not work, and that the ways to solve our country's problems are too complicated for us to understand. They will tell us that they will make the right choices to create change, and that from here on out, everything will be fine. Yet at the same time, they will spend billions fighting reform. But now, we are more connected and more powerful than ever, and we will fight for equality for every social class in America. It's turning the system upside down, and it changes everything. Restoring the gold standard won't be easy, but if we succeed, we will have saved the future of our country for ourselves, our children, and for future generations. And that's worth fighting for.